Hi, I'm Tim. Join me in this video as we discuss the history of the Navy's F4F Wildcat, followed by the F6F Hellcat World War II fighters. Let's get to it. Recently, I took the Guilo's F6F Hellcat model airplane kit converted to radio control flight. I'll put a card up on top for it. The plane flew great. It was an interesting conversion project, but as I was building the airplane, I became interested in the history behind this aircraft, and that's the subject of this video. In short, this aircraft was built for a little over 2 years by the Grumman Aircraft Corporation on Long Island, New York. 12,200, a little bit more than 12,200 of these Hellcats were built. They only served frontline service for a little over 2 years. At the end of the war, in September of 1945, they were pretty much at their end of their useful life with jets coming on board. However, to build 12,200 aircraft in 2 years is just remarkable. And the Hellcats are responsible for shooting down more enemy aircraft than any other aircraft in the U.S. inventory. The Brits flew a few, with about 5,200 enemy aircraft shot down. So what I'd like to do in this video, we'll talk about the predecessor to the Hellcat, the F4F Wildcat. An interesting diversion on how they train these pilots with aircraft carriers on the Great Lakes, and then finally the Hellcat itself. Let's talk about the F4F Wildcat and the story behind that airplane. The Grumman Corporation had a long history of building fighters for the Navy, primarily biplanes. Until the late 1930s, the Navy specified a monoplane fighter. A couple competitions, and the Wildcat was first produced in 1939, accepted by the Navy in 1940. And the Wildcat was the primary Navy fighter in 1942 for all Navy carriers. You can see a good view of the engine here, the landing gear that tracks in the fuselage, and the very efficient folding wings. The cockpit is located here. I just can't imagine flying these things in carrier operations. The Wildcat was a good fighter. You just had to know how to employ it. Against the Zero was a superior performing aircraft. You just had to get above the airplane and dive through it and escape to have any hope of success, and the pilots understood this. Because of its smaller size and lower landing speeds, it was very suitable for the smaller escort carriers used to escort convoys in the latter half of the war, especially in the Atlantic. But it was a tough airplane. You can see the field operations here. The United States entered World War II on December 7th, 1941, with the Japanese attack on our naval facilities in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And that was, of course, a traumatic event for the United States, and we immediately entered the World War against Japan and Germany. In Asia, against Japan, because we didn't have any bases to speak of, the Navy was absolutely crucial for air power until we, later on in the war, could get bases on the various islands. And for the Navy to have their effect, they had to have aircraft carriers. There were a very limited number of aircraft carriers. The reason they weren't sunk in Pearl Harbor, 3 carriers are actually out on maneuvers the Sunday of the Pearl Harbor attack. So every carrier was needed immediately for combat operations to turn the tide of the Japanese attack in the Pacific. So the question immediately came up, well, if all the carriers are being used to fight the Japanese, how are we going to train the new pilots on carrier-based operations? What are we going to do? There simply weren't enough carriers. If the Navy had decided to station a carrier in the Gulf of Mexico by Florida, it almost certainly would have been sunk by German submarines. The carrier was too big to get to any other large body of water. The Great Lakes is the only option due to the size of the canals, yet you had to do something. So what the Navy decided to do, they literally took a passenger steamer that was built in 1912, cut off the top, put on a flat deck, and stationed it by Chicago, the Great Lakes Naval Training Facility, and used it to train carrier pilots on the Great Lakes during World War II. This boat literally had side paddles on it to make it, to propel it. It had no armor, no elevators, no crew quarters or anything. It was just a flat top on a boat that Navy carrier pilots could learn to train. Over 17,000 pilots were trained on this carrier. There was the Wolverine and their sister ship Sable. It also allowed the landing signal officers their crucial task to guide the fighters in on the carrier. So let's look at a few pictures of the Wolverine just to show this fascinating sidelight to training naval aviators of World War II. At the start of World War II, the Navy needed every fleet carrier for combat operations with the Japanese. They came up with a brilliant idea of converting a 1912 passenger steamer with the side wheel paddles. They cut off the superstructure, put on a flight deck, put it on the Great Lakes so the boat was safe from German U-boat attack, and trained over 17,000 Navy pilots with carrier operations. The ship had no armament, no armor, didn't even have any elevators. Once the flight deck was full of aircraft, it had to return to its pier at Navy Pier in Chicago, offload the aircraft, prepare for another day's training. As we discussed, the Wildcat was a barely suitable fighter for the opening days of World War II. It was the only fighter on Navy carrier decks for 1942, but something had to come to replace that that was going to be better. So that fell to the Grumman, the company that made the Wildcat. They understood what was needed. They added a larger motor, worked with the pilots to make it optimized for carrier operations, and it came out with the F6F Hellcat. It was flown by the U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, and the British were the three services that flew this aircraft, and about 12,200 were built. So let's take some looks. Let's take a look at some pictures of the Hellcat and a little bit more on its history. The F6F Hellcat was a follow-on to the Grumman F4F Wildcat, often called the big brother of the Wildcat. It looks fairly similar, but it is a much bigger airplane using a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine, the same engine, by the way, that is on the P-47 and the Corsair. The Hellcat was optimized for carrier operations. The pilot set a little bit higher, the nose sloped down, but most importantly, with its higher power setting and survivability, it was a capable adversary for the Japanese Zero. 12,200 of these aircraft were built over 2 years, and they were responsible for shooting down 5,200 enemy aircraft. That's the most enemy aircraft lost by any U.S. fighter in World War II. The other service to fly the Hellcat was the British off of their escort carriers, and they did a very good job with this aircraft shown here with invasion stripe colors. The Hellcat was the largest number of aces. 305 pilots achieved ace status. This is a view of the cockpit. Again, similar to the Wildcat, if you notice here the white landing gear handle, the Hellcat did have retractable landing gear by hydraulics. You didn't have to hand crank it like what was required with the Wildcat, which is a huge improvement for safety and just general pilot operations. The wings folded back nicely. Note that they extend a little bit from the fuselage because the center section houses the retractable landing gear. A nice view of various workers on a carrier with a Hellcat. It was a very tough aircraft. Here you can see the tail literally being cut off during an accident on a carrier landing, but the pilot is safe in the forward section. Here's another inadvertent accident, nosed over on landing. Again, minimal damage to the aircraft and the pilot can walk away. On this look at the Wildcat and Hellcat aircraft, they're significant fighter aircraft in the history of the United States Navy, the United States military, and they were an absolutely crucial component to our winning World War II against the Japanese. Thank you.